Hello and welcome to the Tournament Poker Project. My name's John.
And I'm Tain.
And we are two recreational poker players all the way from Essex. And this pod is all about documenting our learning journey to get good enough at poker to play in the World Series of Poker and to be able to win it, the whole thing. We're not professional players. We are very much in our learning stages, although we've been doing this for since April now, so
yep,
fair while, 7 months or so, and we've obviously played before that, so we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. It's safe to say at the right stakes we're profitable players online, aren't we? We're both making small but wins. We're going up. But as we're not professionals, please don't take everything we say as gospel. This is our take on things, and we'd love to hear from you as well. So if you want to text your thoughts in the chat, please do so. So let's dive into a hand then, Tain, shall we?
Yeah, get it straight on. This one's fresh off the press. This is one I played earlier today.
So we heads up. So what was it? How did this start? Was this like a tournament, a sit and go?
Yeah, just a little 9-person sit and go. It was hyper turbo, I believe. So it started with only 25 big blinds, and the blinds were going up pretty rapidly. I felt I had a very good control over the game. My reading on the villain is that they were okay. They had a few good moves, but I also felt they were making some mistakes in with that. So things like they were free betting and they were doing it fairly often, but their free bet was generally just to smash all in. So it's like they know they need to do something in that position, and it was constructed in a way that they were just blindly going all in. They were clearly picking their spots, and they were doing it a bit too often for it to be only with their good hands. But there's some other things that they were doing that weren't overly good. Sometimes they turned over a couple of cards and it's like, what? I don't understand why you didn't raise in that position. You had fairly decent hand.
Trying to get too tricky. Sometimes when someone's sort of betting pretty good and mixing in a lot of bluffs, when they finally get something on the flop, they're like, oh, check. And then it's like, yeah, they kind of go a bit backwards with it. But all right then. Well, so we're heads up. We are in the big blind, so the button is on the villain. We have 2,687 chips, so say 2,700 chips. Villains, we've got him covered. He's got 1,550 odd, and the blinds are 75 and 150, and it looks like there's a 15 ante each as well. Okay, so yeah, there's chips to play with. It's not like all in or nothing at all, is it? Even though it's a turbo. Yeah, all right then. Let's see then. So we are big blind. So the villain's first to act. What does he do?
They call.
He just calls. So he completes, and we have pocket queens. So, what are your thoughts here then? What was you thinking? Seems to me this is a raise, no? Or a bet?
It depends. So sometimes it would be a bet, but I had raised quite a lot against this villain. And they had a little streak of folding a bit too readily every time they called. So I felt they were showing weakness. When they called, they were calling because of the strength of their hands, not calling because of any other reason. And I did get, maybe I should have raised it, but I did get a little scared of.
When you say calling because of the strength of the hand, you mean they haven't got overly strong cards, so they just call? They're not mixing in like calling with aces and shit?
No, they've split their range into 3 parts. Raising range is your top ends, calling range is the mids, and
okay.
They actually did open fold far too often as well.
Cards face up then, so he's got a middling hand.
Yes.
Okay. So you want him to catch something?
Yeah. I weren't too keen on raising it, although a min raise might have been called. My standard raise was a min raise at this point, just because we're too short for it to be much more than that, but it would achieve everything I wanted it to. But I was also in a good position. I battled to be the stack that I was, and if I just kind of wanted to go for the kill, and I didn't feel that a raise in this position would have done that.
Okay, fair enough. So you opted to check. I don't mind that. Yeah, like you've got good rationale for that. So let's see a flop.
Oh no, my point.
You did raise.
But I did raise.
So you did raise, and actually, yeah, you've gone about what 2.3 or something.
2.1 that way.
Yeah, I actually prefer that. So I think that's good. Yeah, I mean, I get why sometimes you want to disguise your hand, but he might, any king and ace hits the flop, it just becomes very complicated. Whereas if he calls this now, it feels like there's more chance he's got a king or an ace, although maybe not actually. If he's very straightforward, he would have probably raised with a good king or ace or any ace anyway. So him calling this doesn't necessarily mean he's got a king or an ace. So we could probably still cautiously, but still proceed on king and ace flops.
But no worries. Villain does call.
Okay.
So just to have a think through what his range is going to look like, I feel that 100% certain he does not have aces, he does not have kings, he doesn't have ace king, he doesn't have ace queen suit, like any of them premium hands.
Yeah,
he doesn't have.
But he might have stuff like king 9, king 8. I mean, maybe even like ace 2, ace 3, and some raggy aces to some extent, depends on how high he values his aces.
In this situation, I would be surprised that he just called with any ace. I wouldn't put aside the very bottom of the offsuits, but I feel that he would be raising every single. Like, he weren't shy to raise. So, and pretty much any ace, I think he'd be moving with, but he would have all the kings. I also feel he'd have a lot of the hands that I'd be dominating. So all the raggy queens. He won't have anything above queen jack.
He's called a big bet in relation to his stack size. He's just called off 25% of his stack pre-flop. So he means business, though. We've got to realise that surely, because the pot's now going to the flop. The pot's 810, and he's got 1250 behind. Yeah, the SPR is like 1.5. So if he hits any top, if he's got like a king 9 and it's a 9 high flop, he's moving with that, or he should do. He should be. I mean, try and get the chips in.
One thing to note is, because it is a hyper turbo, that kind of allowance does come at a. You allow a bit more risk, if that makes sense. So you can't, even though you are committing a big part of your pot and you should be looking to go all in, you don't, because you'd be doing that for most of your hands. I mean, you start so shallow and the blinds move up so fast that to get any kind of playability, you do just accept a bit more. I'm going to lose a big bit of my stack, and it might mean I'm really short, but that's when I'll go all in rather than this hand. Does that make sense? You have to just to get a bit more playability. So I didn't look into it too much, because again, I'm certainly didn't have anything premium. And it might have narrowed out the bottom part of his range. So anything from, say, 8-9, I don't think he would have thrown away 8-9, but anything from 8-9 down, I can imagine he weren't calling in that position for that reason. So it is really, he is condensing his range to that middling.
Yeah, okay. Just basically seeing if he hits, isn't he? So very straightforward then.
So we're sitting there with our queens. We're now out of position, and I'll let you.
Yeah, the flops come Jack, 6, 2 spades. So Jack of spades, 6 of spades, and the Jack of diamonds. Okay, I mean, it's a pretty great flop for us. Yes, he could have a Jack, but I mean, it is part of a middling range. You know, he has probably got a lot of Jack 10s, Jack 9s. Queen Jack, I find it hard to believe he wouldn't have raised pre-flop. But there are some Jacks in his range. But, I mean, the SPR is too small. I feel like we should just be looking to get some chips in here. So that being said, what would he call if he hasn't got a Jack? If he's holding a 6, is he going to move with that? He probably should. So if we put chips in and get called, we're just hoping he's got his 6, or maybe he's got a pocket pair and didn't think to move with it pre-flop. Maybe he's, you know, that would be ideal if he's, you know, sitting there with some sort of pair of 7s, pair of 5s or something.
So
yeah, I'm trying to think how many 6s, apart from pocket 6s, how many 6s he would have called a quarter of his stack off pre-flop.
just, yeah, well, Jack 6 who's probably in his range. King
I hope
6,
not.
Queen 6. He's probably got a lot of the 6s. I reckon suited as well. Not them suits, but just as a, you know, 9-6 of diamonds, I feel he might have called with. As I said, I didn't consider them that good a player, so they might overvalue, you know, 1-gapper, 2-gapper, lower cards at this level. You know, where you get your heads up, your short stacks, they're useless, but they don't realise that changed when we got short stacks and heads up.
Well, if he's capable of calling that size bet pre-flop with 6s in his range, then this just feels like, well, you may as well just get all the chips in, because the SPR's 1.5. If he's got a 6, he's probably going to call it. If he's got a Jack, he'll definitely call it. And if he hasn't got a 6 and no pocket pairs, then he's folding. Anyway, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it feels like we just got to get him in. I can't see us folding this. Have you seen him bluff at all? Like if we check this, is it better to check this and let him include bluffs in, you know, go in with bluffs?
I don't specifically remember outright bluffs, but I do. He definitely had bluffs. The frequency of his betting showed that he must have had bluffs. He couldn't have had a good hand every time. So he definitely knew what he was doing, and he definitely didn't give up pre-flop or give up after one flop bet. But it weren't in as a coordinated way as you'd hope from a better player. I'd normally be able to see what a better player was betting at. I remember him turning over some cards, and when I'd won the hand, I'm like, you were just stabbing in the dark at that point, weren't you? Kind of thing. You'd missed a flop, and you thought the only way to win this is to stab at it. I don't think 6s are in his hand. I don't think they're in his range. Same as 7s, 8s, 9s. He might get lucky. I might get lucky with 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s. That could be in his calling range. If I'm betting, I'm not shoving at this point, because I don't think anything's calling it other than a Jack.
But if he did call a quarter of his stack off with like pocket 4s or whatever, that feels like quite a bad play, because what are you hoping to flop that you then don't just go all the way with anyway? Like, basically any flop is going to have probably like all over cards to his pocket 4s. So then he's like, what, you know, it's like you may as well just shove pre-flop with pocket 4s, even if you've, you know, I don't know why. I certainly wouldn't call with pocket 4s, because I don't know, doesn't seem like the way to go.
Yeah, but if I'm betting here, I'm mostly targeting something like King 10, King Queen. I don't think King Queen's really in his range, to be honest, but King 10 would be, Queen 9, something like that, which is around the Jacks and has an overcard where he might come along for one more street. and
If
then
you
we can
bet,
evaluate.
if you bet really small, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like the check. I like the check because I feel like the SPR is so low at 1.5 that he's either got a jack and he's got you beat. You potentially got a 6, and that's the only really, a6 that yes, you might get a call. I don't know. Like, to me, I don't know if calling with like King 10, for instance, would be. You're putting in so much of your stack on a very speculative hand. It doesn't feel like we're deep stacked enough to be doing stuff like that. So
yeah,
I like the check or a small bet.
The problem I'd have with a check is that so much of their range is trash and is missed. They're almost certainly going to check behind. So I can, even though putting chips in is probably going to get folds, I'm not targeting that anyway. That unless I get lucky and they catch up on later streets, I need to put the money in. I need to start putting some money in myself. Otherwise, it's I'm just not going to be able to get the value, or they're going to be able to get away from it, or there's cards that could come which make it even worse for me trying to get value. If he's got a king at the moment, he's got an overcard. If an ace comes, and I'm almost certain he hasn't got an ace in his range, that's it. Betting's over. I'm not going to see anything else. So as much as a bet might get folds, I'm not too sure. I'm not keen on letting it get away for free, because he will do. He's in position, so he's got the option of checking behind every time.
Okay.
That's my feeling anyway.
Alrighty.
So
you bet
pot's 8.
Yeah, pot's 8-10. You bet 2, 4, 3. So that's roughly just under a third pot. I don't mind the size. It's small enough to maybe get a call. I just can't see him calling with anything speculative though that isn't a 6 or a jack, obviously. Or obviously he could have 2 spades. He could have, if he's been playing these like low suited connectors, which he probably shouldn't be so much. Like, shouldn't be calling with them, at least at these stack depths. But he could have 2 spades, I suppose, if you say, because you said he has been doing that a bit and not really noticed that we're short stack now.
Yeah. I mean, I got the feeling that they would be calling with king high, just because we are short. There's every chance that I'm making this move with nothing as well. It's difficult for me to have a jack, in as much as I've got less jacks in my range than he has, so he actually has that advantage over me, although the rest of his range is trash, whereas the rest of my range is pretty strong. I've got all the aces. Well, aces probably should be in my checking range, but kings, ace king, ace queens, I've got all of the good hands. I've got ace jacks in my hand. I've got the king jacks, and he hasn't got them. So he does have the nut advantage, but I've definitely got the range advantage. So there is every chance that he thinks I'm doing this with nothing. And he might call it speculatively, at least for one street. I also think if you're not a good player, you do think, oh, well, I've got an overcard. Let's just see what happens. If a queen comes, I've got an up and down. That kind of, let's see what happens for one more street attitude, and then let's take it from there, kind of thing. And I've seen players like that go down to like 2 big blind stacks without even thinking. They'll just hold their chips up and go, oh, I've barely got anything. They don't think, stop just limping then. That kind of thing.
Stop calling it off on speculative stuff when you've not got the chips to win. All right, so he calls, he flat calls. So the pot has now grown to just under 1,300. So Villain's got less than a pot bet behind at 1,000. Okay, let's see that turn. So it's the 9 of clubs. Yeah, I mean, so if he did have something like Queen 10, he's now, he might well feel committed now to just go with this. I'm really struggling to see what he's called that with. It's got would he not be jamming there if he had?
Yeah.
Oh, it feels like is he not slow playing a monster here, Tain? Like, why would you just be calling this down? I know you're saying you see these people do it, but that's pretty silly just to like cool down with not much. Maybe he's got a 6 though, and he's just kind of look, I will go all the way to the river, but I'd rather see it cheap. So he could have a 6. It feels to me we've got to get all our chips in anyway. Like if he's got a jack, he's got a jack.
Yeah, I mean at this point, my idea of him having possibly King 10 made this even better because I've got 2 of the queens. So if he's silly enough to go for a gut shot, which he might be, I haven't seen anything to say for certain that that's the case, but that 9 was a good card, given that the chances of him hitting the straight are small. So he's playing to 4s, but he's got a 10% chance, and the pot odds are always going to be better in my favour because the chip stack's too low.
I feel like he must have something like he could have like what would be interesting if he had something like 9-10 of spades or 8-9 of spades, where he had a backdoor straight, but also he had the flush draw, and now he's hit his 9. That's a possibility. That would be pretty handy. We'll definitely be getting all the chips now because he's just hit a pair and he's still got that flush draw. Yeah. But other than that, I feel like it's a weird way to play if he's just got a 6. Could be doing it, just seeing trying to get to a cheap, but knowing he's probably got to go all in if you make him. And other than that, he's slow playing something big here. Maybe he's hit a jack and he's just slow playing it.
Yeah.
There's a few things he could have, and it could be either way. It could be that he's slow playing a big hand, or he's got a draw in hand. Just it depends what he does after this, I suppose.
I think the thing that was playing on my mind at this point was that he had no reason to think that slow playing a jack was necessary, if that's what he was doing. So I was kind of saying it just doesn't. I got rid of the jack as a possibility because he could have just bet into me, and I've been playing so aggressively, and he definitely would have seen me cool down quite a few different all-ins because we're playing so short stack. So I can appreciate how wide someone's range is. So when I've got ace-9 offsuit, I know I'm making a good call because I've got them covered, and they've only got 4 big blinds. I mean, they're making that move with all of the worst aces, as well as King 9 and what happened, Queen 8 and things like that, which is what they were shoving with. So he's got no reason to slow play it, as much as that's a possibility. I just couldn't. I'd got rid of that from their range at that point. So I was thinking, I'm going for this King 10, but I'd kind of want him to have other bluffs and other draws and that in there. So maybe the spade draw was maybe hoping for the spade draw. But anyway.
Okay, so let's just recap then. So the board at the moment is Jack, 6-9, and there's 2 spades. You've got your pocket queens. You raised. He completed. You raised pre-flop. Flop comes down. You bet just under third pot. He calls, and then the turns come. And what do you do next then? What happens now? Okay, so you bet 389 into 1300. So again, it's just under a third, isn't it? Actually nearer, or coming up, between a quarter and a third pot. I don't mind it. I think I'd have probably just jammed at this point. If he's drawing, he's already, he's gone down to 1,000 chips. Big blinds 150, so he's got 7 big blinds behind. If he's calling 389, he's probably calling a jam. And if he is drawing and he just calls this, and then the turn comes and he misses his draw, then he's not putting any more chips in. Whereas if he calls this and he does hit on the river, completes his draw, then he will put all his chips in. So I think this might have been better as a jam at this point, I would say.
Yeah, my rationale for keeping it just as a third was, again, sticking to the likelihood that they're on a draw, where I either wanted them to do some work and bet back at me. I felt that if I just jammed, it was less likely to get called because of it gives them no opportunity past their draw. They are then having to make a decision of, am I going to try to draw or am I going to fold? Whereas a small bet gives them out. It's more likely. I reckon I would get the small bet called enough times. Yeah, get it called enough times more than a jam would get called. Where I'm still ahead, that is.
Okay.
That it makes up for it. Yeah, I mean, like
I see what you're saying, but what happens on the river if a third spade hits? Are you check folding, or are you going to go with it anyway?
It'd be evaluating where I'm at. It might turn into a check folder. It might be a small blocking bet or something. The other side is that if I don't think they're calling with. There is a possibility they wouldn't be calling with a draw. At which point, a jam in this position is only getting called by potentially someone who's just hit a 9, but they've not played in a way that says they've got a hand that's just hit a 9.
Yeah.
Or more likely, they've already got a jack and they're well ahead.
Yeah. Could be. It seems if he calls this, he's either got 2 spades, or he's just hit the 9, or he's slow playing. He's already got a jack.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, okay. I felt a jam would have got too many folds. Like the fact that he called this weren't a surprise. That I think that's where I'm going. So from the way the game was playing, the way this heads up was playing, it weren't, because of this being a hyper turbo, this weren't as unusual as it might seem. Like SPRs aren't as significant because the SPR is always terrible. Like the second you play your first hand, your SPR is getting small.
Oh, wow.
Okay, but anyway, so
he called. So the pot is now up at just over 2,000, and he's only got 600 behind. So he's, if he's yeah, okay. Okay, and then the river comes 3 of hearts. So the final board is Jack of spades, Jack of diamonds, 6 of spades, 9 of clubs, 3 of hearts. So the draws didn't get there. There's no possible straights on the board. There's no flush on the board. The only hands that are beating you now is if he holds a jack, or he had pocket 6s. Maybe he had pocket 3s. Again, I think that would have been very strange and incorrect for him to call pre-flop with pocket 3s. I don't think you should be calling pocket 3s and then just calling it away. I think he'd have been. I think it's just incredible luck if he's just hit a full house with pocket 3s. So none of the draws got there. So if you bet now, what is he calling with that's worse? Maybe that 9, maybe that 8-9 of spades, 9-10 of spades. 9-10 of spades makes a lot of sense for the type of hands you say he's calling with pre-flop, and the continuing. He's going for the draw, but then the 9 camel, I've now got that, and then he might call this on the end with the 9. There's 2 jacks, so there's less chance you've got a jack. He must know you might have a big pair, but I don't suppose he can fold for 600 more into a $2,000 pot. So
yeah. So my feeling here was I'm never betting ever, because as you said, I'm almost certainly you get called by better.
Yeah.
And if he's got that 9, he might check behind, but he also might think
go for it.
Yeah, but more likely the hands that have missed, the hands that were a draw, as much as he's betting a third of the pot, almost exactly.
A desperate bluff.
it might be I've got no other choice. I've got
Yeah.
7.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got 7 high. Let's just be done with this and give it my best.
Yeah. At this point, yeah, it's the only way you're going to get chips out of a worse hand, isn't it? Except for the 9, if he's got that 9, I think he still would call that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel that he would have come to life on the 9 if it had come in. I might be wrong, but yeah. Anyway, I do check.
And he bets, well, not quite his whole stack. He leaves himself one big blind. So he bets 450 into the 2,000 pot.
I couldn't for the life of me understand what hand that beats me leaves 161 in their stack.
Well, I just see it as irrelevant when they do stuff like that. People like raising pre-flop with all but one big blind and stuff. It's like, well, whatever happens, that's going in, isn't it? Like, and you're never gonna get to flop, and then he raises his last one big blind into like a 20 big blind pot, and you fold. So I don't know why people do that. It's a weird thing, bit of mind games maybe, but I just ignore it. So I would just call this and
Yeah.
There's no option, but at this point, you can't not call it. I mean, you've got a big pair. There's a jack beats you. That's pretty much it. A slow played jack or a slow played pocket kings, pocket aces that he just decided to slow play all the way. Could be.
Yeah. It's like 1/6 pot bet, and it's like it really is tiny.
I can't see what hand he could have where his line on this has been correct. So I'm going to guess at something like 8-9 or 9-10 of spades.
So I do call. I've got no inkling. I don't want to get that last 161 off him. I'm also not certain I'm winning. I just don't like the 161. I can't understand why he's left that back.
No. But you've got to call it. There's no not calling this. It's just not in a million years.
Yeah, and that does lead me to believe like there's 2 reasons why someone would leave 161 in their stack. One is that they're bluffing and they're doing such a bad job of it that they just want to leave themselves something.
It could be.
Or they actually don't think they don't think I'll call a jam. They actually want to make it smaller because it's more enticing to be called. And because I've gone bet check, they're thinking, okay, let's make this as little as possible and just guarantee.
He's desperate to get his trip jacks called.
Yeah. So I certainly weren't going to raise it on that being a likelihood. And then we go.
He did have a jack, 7 jack of clubs. Okay, so he hit that jack and he just slow played it all the way down.
Yeah, and he got so lucky with the hand that I had.
Yeah.
Because
it's annoying because any jack highballed, you'd have just that would have just taken him down. But yeah, he slow played it. Difficult. Like once you got to the flop, and there was an SPR of 1.5. I don't see that you're ever folding pocket queens ever.
Yeah,
I think it's just one of those things.
According to Poker Tracker, my equity at this point is 89%. Right, my queens are winning that often against. I don't know if that's against any 2 cards per se, but given most of the strong overcards weren't in villains range, none of the strong pairs, none of the sets, it was incredibly difficult for them to have the hand that they did. But yeah, and somehow he didn't get that extra 161 because I would have called it. And being out of position, I wouldn't have played it this way with most of my other hands that would have been betting in this way. So if I had ace queen, for instance, I probably would have bet 1 straight, and then as soon as they'd called, checked and evaluated, especially with the 9 bringing in some straights. There's straight draws, flush draws. I'm only playing ace high. Check it, see where they're at. If they check behinds, they've got a medium hand. If they bet, see where I feel. Are they bluffing or playing strong? And it's just the villain got very lucky that I had a pair of queens that could just keep barreling.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
it was suspicious, wasn't it? I suppose he was calling such big chunks of his stack. It's like, yeah, I guess maybe we could have guessed it. I don't know. Tricky one, but once you've got queens and you're at these stack depths, the chips are going in. It almost doesn't matter what comes. It's, you know, or how it was played. I mean, if anything, maybe, you know, a learning from it might be that if someone's calling such big chunks of their stack all the way down, then they've got it. I think if there wasn't two spades on the board, we might have been wise to slow down, thinking, well, there's not many draws, so he's got something, you know, he's got it, and maybe we just slow right down. I don't know, could have maybe done that.
Yeah, I'm trying, because I mean, when someone slow plays you like that and it's really successful for them, especially when your hand is what looks to be very strong, you do need to. It's difficult for me to rationalize, did they abuse me and use my aggression against me, or actually it works for them, but that's by coincidence. The truth is that if they'd have taken that passive action against any of my other cards, they would have got a single bet on the flop, maybe not even that. And then as soon as I've checked to them and they've bet at me, I folded, and they've got a quarter of the money they did, and they'll probably still think, oh, you know, I've won the hand, I slow played, haha. But they didn't. They could have. I mean, Harry's got away with 161 still in his stack. Should be an embarrassment. When he looks at my queens, he must know.
Yeah, he must know he could have got it. Yeah, this is the thing. He knows that he could have. Now he's seen your queens, he knows that he could have probably jammed on the flop and you'd have called it. But I suppose from his point of view, he's just thinking, I'll just let this guy potentially bluff at it because I just desperately want to get as many chips as possible. So I don't hate the villain's play considering his cards. I think, you know, he's done what he thought was best to get all the chips, and it did work. You know, I think if you were bluffing with a hand like, you know, like a decent ace, or if you were bluffing away at it, he could be thinking, yeah, this is the way to get chips out of someone who hasn't got a hand. You know, he's got such a strong hand. Considering your head's up, and he's hit a blooming trip jacks on the flop. He's like thinking, I'm way too strong here. I need to get this. I need to get as many different types of hands to put their chips in as possible. Loads of those hands being bluffs, and the only way to get bluffs out of you is to let you do all the betting.
Yeah, but it's not feasible for him to get me to continue betting, but on multiple streets, especially on a paired board, a paired flop, because it's too difficult to hit. Like, and then it becomes a bit scary. Like what happens, you know, bet, check. So he did get a second bet off me, but that's purely on the fact that I've got a good hand. If I had ace 10, I probably wouldn't have bet the turn. And all of a sudden he's not getting, just checking behind isn't yielding what he needs. It's relying on me to do some actions that when you're playing a hand like Jack 7, you've got lucky. So it's not actually perceivable that, oh, he must have a jack because he's betting. Does that make sense? Like, he's looking at it in the wrong way. If he thinks his hand's too strong to be betting, he needs to wait for me to catch up or something. His hand's very, you know, it started very mediocre. So the fact it's hit so strong is pretty concealed. Bet away, just bet. Yeah, you haven't got ace jack in your range. I would never have put him on ace jack or king jack or queen jack if he started betting. I might have actually thought, he might have Jack 7, but I probably would have put him on a pair of 10s, a pair of 8s, or something like, something that's a bit more akin to taking a stab. Oh, it's a paired boards. There's less. There's only 2 cards for them to have hit, so let's take a punt. Yeah. Anyway,
good hand though, mate. Yeah, nice one. It's good to see a heads up hand actually, like where we're not so, we're not got that luxury of looking at what position they opened from or called from. It's all much more, the stacks are short. There's only 2 of you in it. You're forced to play a lot of hands.
Yeah,
it's a different dynamic heads up, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the way that, including myself, most people play exceptionally bad at. Like, one of my immediate things that I noticed when I was playing them heads up is how often they open folded. So they're meant to be defending their small blinds like 70-80%, maybe more, and they were folding at least 50%. So they're folding out all of the hands that are going to hit every moderate board. So anytime a moderate board came out, so they're capping the bottom part of their range out, and it's like, okay, you've done me a favour there. As I said, I think they were betting with a 3-tier range, so bet, call, fold.
Well, you were right. You were right about that, because Jack 7 suited. It's suited, so yeah, he's kind of it's middling, isn't it? He's kind of just played it. Yeah,
I mean, Jack 7 is probably far enough away. What is that, a 4-gapper? So that is, I believe, would go into your raising range, because it's not so great at making, because it can't make any straights. But if it's Jack 8, that actually would be a GTO part of your calling range, I think, because it performs well post flop. Going to give him a bit of credit, but no, Jack 7's too far away.
What happened with the rest of the game anyway? So he's got you like stacked now, but you're not out of the game. You've still got like 1,400 odd chips versus his 3,000. So he's got you at, stacked 2-1. But
yeah, I went out. Where did I go? Hand summary. This one. So yeah, I went out on Queen 6. I was down to piddling.
Yeah.
Stack though, yeah, barely 4 or 5 big blinds, and it just kind of all. I hit 6.
Yeah. And you
went in.
Oh yeah, pocket jacks.
You do.
Oh well, look, yeah. Thanks for the hand, Tain. It's nice to get back into it.
But yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to look at it as well is that my next learning, I've said to you quite a few times, is to really pick a hole into the button versus big blind ranges, specifically starting from the button, because that's nice and easy and it's the best position. You've got quite a wide range, you've got the best position, but then flipping it and doing how the big blind defends that, because that's incredibly difficult. It's so different to how you play the rest of the board and things like that. And that kind of was me trying to get a bit more insight into how you would think through it, how I think through it, picking up on different behaviors, because as you said, like, heads up it's just a really different game.
The end boss, isn't it?
It is. I was actually listening to a pod, I can't remember, was it Thinking Pod or something, just they were speaking to a heads up expert.
What, Doug Polk?
Is that the one, Doug Polk?
So that was Upswing Poker. Upswing, yeah, like Level Up or whatever they call it, and they had Doug Polk on there. Yeah, he's a bit of a legend, isn't he? Heads up.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's like started running some of these thoughts, just some of the things he was talking about and some of the different strategies he employs, and it's like it is almost a different game. Like,
it really is.
Into it.
It's intense. You're suddenly got one person, like you suddenly can really tune into all of their habits and their exploits, and it's not like you can never keep track. I can't anyway. I can't keep track of a whole table's worth of patterns. But once you get heads up, if you want to play sort of 20-30 hands in that heads up, you start to see patterns in much more obvious detail, and yeah.
Yeah. And like, I mean, in some ways I thought I could never be that level of intricate. Some of the things that he was talking about, some of the way he constructs his ranges and tweaks bits here and there and responds and exploits and all that. But then I did think it's just what you said, you've got none of the other stuff to remember. You don't have to care about position. You don't ever have to change your range other than to tweak it. So actually you're honing your skills into a single, a single part of the game tree, essentially.
Definitely. Definitely. It in a way, it allows you to focus more on what they're doing. It allows you to exploit them more. But in conversely to that, it's actually harder because they're not folding loads and they're only getting involved in certain hands. They're kind of forced to play a lot of hands as well. So typically the ranges are a lot wider. So there's parts of it that are easier and parts of it that make it hard again.
Like my immediate feeling on going into like an exclusively heads up tournament is that it's much harder to get lucky. So you really are just a battle of player. I mean, like you'd need to be lucky 30, 40 hands in a row to do over the very best heads up players, because there's nowhere to hide. It's like you can't fold and wait for a good hand because every hand you're in and every hand you have to pay for. Scary. But there you go. Anyway, cool. Good stuff.
Yeah, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, other than I hate people slow playing and against me.
I was looking at it thinking, I could have done that. I'm hated as well. All right, thanks a lot, Tain. Appreciate it, and thanks to the listeners. We hope to see you again soon.
Cheers, everyone. Subscribe, like, listen to us often, give us advice, give us feedback. Cheers.